Every explanation for what happened on that mountain fails. Not partially, not slightly, completely. In the previous parts, we followed 9 experienced hikers into the northern Ural Mountains, and we traced what happened after they disappeared. They cut their way out of their own tent. They fled into a -30-degree blizzard without their gear. Some froze where they fell. Others tried to make it back. And 4 of them were found months later with injuries that should not have been survivable and should not have been possible. Shattered bones without damage to the skin, radiation on their clothing, and details that even now no one has been able to explain. This is where most cases would begin to make sense. This one doesn't, because every theory that has been proposed over the last 60 years, every scientific explanation, every official conclusion, every attempt to bring order to what happened on that slope, leaves something behind, something it cannot account for. And it's in those gaps that this case continues to exist. The theories that have surrounded the Dyatlov Pass incident over the following decades are numerous, and the important and sobering thing about every single one of them is that none, not one, accounts for the complete body of evidence. Each explains certain elements and fails to explain others, and the gap between what is explained and what is not is precisely where the mystery continues to live, resistant to resolution, indifferent to the considerable intelligence that has been directed at it. The avalanche hypothesis is the most immediately intuitive: an exposed slope, a sudden snow event, catastrophic compressive trauma. The 2019 Russian government reinvestigation conducted by the Sverdlovsk Regional Prosecutor's Office concluded that some form of avalanche or snow slab displacement was the most probable cause of the incident. A computational study published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal in 2021 modeled the specific slope geometry of Kholat Syakhl and argued that a relatively small slab avalanche could have produced injury patterns consistent with those observed. The conclusion was considered credible by several researchers who reviewed it. And yet the search party that arrived on February 26th found the slope above the tent completely undisturbed. The tent itself, though damaged, was still standing, not buried beneath avalanche debris, not swept downhill, not compressed under the weight of a moving snow mass. 5 of the 9 died of hypothermia rather than trauma, meaning they were alive and ambulatory, and making deliberate decisions for an extended period after leaving the tent. Behavior that is fundamentally inconsistent with being struck suddenly in their sleep by a sliding wall of snow. And the severe internal injuries found on 3 of the ravine victims showed a conspicuous absence of the soft tissue damage that avalanche medicine specialists consistently note in genuine avalanche fatalities. A moving mass of compacted snow abrades and lacerates the surface of the body it strikes. The skin of these 3 victims was largely intact over the precise regions where their bones had been shattered. The avalanche theory explains the exposed camp location and perhaps the decision to flee, and it cannot explain the standing tent, the walking survivors, or the skin. The infrasound hypothesis offers an entirely different mechanism, not a physical blow, but a psychological and physiological one. Infrasound, produced at frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, is known under certain wind and terrain conditions to cause intense anxiety, spatial disorientation, visual disturbances, and, in documented cases, overwhelming and irrational panic. The theory proposes that a specific configuration of wind interacting with the ridge geometry of Kholat Syakhl on the night of February 1st generated an infrasound event powerful enough to produce acute, uncontrollable terror in the sleeping hikers. Terror so sudden and so total that it drove them to slash their way out of the tent and flee into the darkness without stopping to dress, without rational calculation, in the grip of a biological alarm system far older than conscious thought. The theory has the considerable virtue of explaining the element of the case that is, in many ways, the hardest to account for through any physical mechanism. Not how the hikers died, but why 9 experienced mountaineers abandoned every survival instinct they possessed and ran barefoot into a blizzard. The image of those footprints moving together down the slope in loose formation, purposeful rather than chaotic, that is the image the infrasound theory was built to explain, and it explains it with a certain elegance. The difficulty is that infrasound at intensities sufficient to produce such effects is extremely challenging to generate through natural, topographical conditions alone, and no measurements, contemporaneous or subsequent, exist to confirm that such conditions prevailed on that specific slope on that specific night. The theory accounts for the flight and cannot account for the injuries, the radiation, or the missing facial tissue. The military testing hypothesis is perhaps the one most directly supported by Ivanov's late-life statement, and the one that the broader Cold War context of the incident makes most historically plausible. The Soviet military was actively testing a range of weapon systems across remote territory throughout this period. Parachute mines capable of detonating above ground and transmitting blast force through the body without necessarily leaving external marks on the skin, experimental rocket propellants, atmospheric dispersal systems whose precise nature remained classified for decades. A detonation event of some kind near or above the campsite could account for the explosive internal injuries with intact skin, the sudden terror that drove the group from the tent, the radiation detected on specific garments, and the Soviet government's evident interest in keeping the investigation's conclusions vague and its files inaccessible for 30 years. The closed case, the classified archive, the 3-year closure of the mountain, Ivanov's statement about pressure from above, all of these fit a scenario in which the Soviet state knew, or strongly suspected, that a military incident had killed 9 of its citizens and chose, as it had chosen in so many other cases during that era, to bury the truth beneath official language and institutional silence. What the military testing theory cannot easily account for is why 5 of the 9 died of hypothermia at distances from the camp rather than from blast effects, why the radiation readings were moderate rather than acute, and why the survivors showed clear evidence of deliberate, rational decision-making in their final hours, rather than the disorientation and incapacitation that serious blast exposure tends to produce. The military theory, like the others, closes some doors and leaves others open, and the doors it leaves open are not small ones. In 2019, 60 years after the incident, the Regional Prosecutor's Office of Sverdlovsk formally reopened the investigation. Investigators traveled to the site. New forensic analysis was commissioned. The declassified case files were reviewed using modern methodologies. In the summer of 2020, the official conclusion was announced. An avalanche, or some form of snow displacement event, was the most probable explanation. The case, as far as the Russian government was concerned, was resolved. What happened to Igor Dyatlov and his 8 companions in the darkness of that slope is not known. After 65 years, 2 official investigations, and thousands of hours of independent research conducted by scientists, journalists, and private individuals across multiple countries and disciplines, the honest answer is simply, we do not know. We know where they went. We know, in broad terms, what killed them. We do not know why they ran or what they were running from, or how the bones of 3 people came to be shattered without marking their skin, or where the tongue of a 20-year-old woman went in the sealed cold of a Siberian ravine. Some events leave behind them a residue of uncertainty that no document and no conclusion can fully dissolve. 9 people walked into those mountains carrying maps and compasses and the calm confidence of the experienced and the young. The mountains did not give back an answer, and the silence that surrounds what remains unknown is, in its own way, as total and as cold as the silence of the northern Urals on a February night in 1959, when something happened that the world has been, very slowly and without success, trying to understand ever since. If you've made it this far, through all 4 parts, then you already know. This isn't just a story, it's a mystery that refuses to let go. 9 experienced hikers. A single night, and questions that, even after decades, still don't have answers. If this series stayed with you the way it was meant to, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Every comment, every share, every subscription tells me that you want more, and there are more cases just like this one. Cases that are just as real, just as deeply strange, and just as unsolved. We're just getting started, because the Dyatlov Pass is one of many. And next time we go somewhere new, a different place, a different era, a different set of unanswered questions. Follow so you don't miss it. The next story is already waiting.